Good evening. I've loved doing that. Cheryl gave me permission.
I can do a set.
Let me warmly introduce to you Cheryl, Yorta Yorta woman, Jaja Warang woman, who's going to give welcome to country. Welcome to Cheryl.
Thank you, darling. Gulpagaka, Yorta Yorta Yamita Waka. Welcome to Yorta Yorta People's Country. Today we pay respects to the 8 clans of the Yorta Yorta Nation. So today we pay respects to our elders that are past, our present elders and our future emerging elders today. But the 8 clans of the Yorta Yorta Nation are Walithika, Kalithaban, Bangarang, Kwat Kwat, Yelba Yelba, Nagira Willem. So today we are respecting our Yetabilla. Our Yetabilla is our animals. Today we will respect our Waka. Our Waka is our land. Today we respect our Walla. Our Walla is our waterways. And today we respect our Yambina. Our Yambina are our people. But today I ask you to turn to each other and say Gulpagaka. Gulpagaka, and that means welcome. And welcome to Yorta Yorta People's Country today, guys. And to the Rural Women's Online. So, welcome to Yorta Yorta People's Country. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight at the culmination, almost the complete culmination of our week here in Shepparton. I first met Julian Thomas in, I think, 2022 in the first phase of our Rural Women Online project, because he's been the driving force behind, amongst other things, the Australian Digital Inclusion Index, which we used heavily, drew on that in planning our Rural Women Online project. He's the perfect keynote speaker for the event we've had here in Shepparton. If you Google Julian Thomas, on Scott, now that everybody's more literate digitally, if you Google him on scholar.google.com.au, I couldn't believe it. I gave up counting, but there's at least a couple of hundred articles that Julian has written around issues of digital progress in society. I said to him this afternoon, he's been so busy, he's written so many, he must be about 180, I think. But look, he's a magnificent thinker in this space. He is the director of the Australian Research Centre for Excellence for Automated Decision-Making in Society, or ADMS. He's Distinguished Professor of Media and Communications at RMIT University. His passion is the nexus between the digital era, which he understands at an intellectual level, a policy level, and the day-to-day level of community and society. He brings a human rights perspective as well to understanding the interface between digital settings and human beings. He describes this as, quote, the volatile and fluid relationship between digital communications and society. I think many of you will share this view. We're at an extraordinary point in our society in terms of the digital era. It's not new. We've been dealing with the digital space for many decades now, but there is something different and challenging now and ahead of us. So Julian, as a social scientist, says he feels obligated as a social scientist to take on the difficult and challenging problems that face us. And on that note, I ask you to welcome Julian Thomas as he delivers our keynote, which is going to be recorded, both video and audio, so that you can have access to it in the weeks to go, and people who have missed out on the opportunity to hear him tonight will be able to to see it as well. So please warmly welcome Professor Julian Thomas.
Thank you very much, Mary, for those very kind words. Listening to you talking about the Google Scholar page makes me feel very tired. But I really do need to say that a lot of our work in this space has been a collaborative and collective effort, and I've just been so pleased by the fact that a number of our key collaborators in that work, including Kieran and Stephanie and many others who have been here this week, Jenny Kennedy, Robin, who was here earlier, have been part of this. As Mary said, I've been working in this general area of digital inclusion and the social consequences of the digital revolution for a long time. You need to understand how exciting it is. It's how exciting it always is for somebody who works on a computer, just writes papers, does quantitative kind of research in different ways, to actually be involved with a program which is doing something really significant on the ground. It's really wonderful. So I'm incredibly pleased to be here. We were really excited and interested as soon as we heard about the idea for Rural Women Online and the aspirations behind it. We could see from the beginning why it could be so significant, and that is something I'd like to talk about a bit tonight. I'll say something just to start with about what I think are some of the critical challenges and opportunities that are facing us all during the current digital transformation. I'll say a little bit about what we have learned, what we know about Victoria and this region, and I hope finally to talk a bit about why I think the program we're here part of this week is so significant. So, access to digital technology is now, as you know, it's the key to how we engage with the world and how we connect to each other. Our research shows that Australians are using these technologies more than ever. This won't surprise you. They're spending more time online and they're using technology to do an ever-increasing range of different things, to learn, to socialise, to keep track of money, to access health services, to entertain themselves. In short, to connect with our communities and to participate in society. And just as we are now using many different digital services and tools, and many of these have been the subject of the sessions this week, from search engines to messaging, photo apps, maps, email, all these kinds of things. At the same time, many of us are also now using a growing number of different kinds of digital devices. Phones, tablets, laptops, wearable devices like watches are increasingly popular, and they all do different things for different purposes. So we are in an exploding and proliferating digital environment. What do we know about who and how those services are being used? Who's using them and how are they being used? So just imagine we have 10 more or less random adult Australians. We know that of those 10, 7 are going to be using the internet to learn or to study. 7 are going to be using the internet to book medical appointments or access healthcare in one form or another online. 8 out of 10 are going to be streaming music, TV or movies, a huge change from a decade ago. 9 out of 10 are using the internet to keep in touch with family or friends online. 9 are banking online. 9 are accessing government services online. So for most of those 10 people, these are absolutely everyday activities. Digital technology becomes powerful when it fades into the background of our lives, when it becomes mundane, and it is. Who and where, then, are those 7, 8 or 9 Australians who are using the internet a lot? They're more likely to live in urban Australia than in places like Shepparton, more likely to have a university degree. They're probably younger, and they likely live in a middle or high income household. So what about those 1 or 2 or 3 people who aren't so well connected, who aren't doing all of those things? Our research shows that even after several decades now of digital transformation, public internet, over 25 years old, we still have 2 out of 10 of those Australians who we would describe as digitally excluded. They lack access to quality, reliable and affordable internet. Many of them, to the extent that they do use the internet, and they may use it quite a bit, but they rely on a single device, a smartphone. And as you know, while smartphones are brilliant and powerful devices, they're not designed to do everything, and they're particularly not designed for the whole range of work or study-related tasks that many of us need to do. Those 2 or 3 also don't have the skills to get the full benefit of technology. They miss out on the economic and social opportunities that tech provides. And that might be about the availability of a quality connection. It might be about cost. It might be about skills. It could be a combination of those things. The point is that we have failed to meet the communication needs of that significant minority of Australians. But our organisations, our governments and businesses who all deliver essential services online are generally catering for the 7 or 8 or 9 out of 10 rather than for the minority. If you think about it, studying or training today means using tech. Bank branches are closing or reducing hours as more and more of their customers switch to websites and apps to manage their finances. Governments and businesses are cutting back on their phone and face-to-face services. And since COVID especially, as you know, they've been directing their resources increasingly towards those lower cost online services. Now, so digital inclusion really means that those services and platforms that we rely on need to be designed to benefit not just the 7 or the 8 or the 9 Australians who are connected, but all 10 of them, all of them, no matter where they are. It's about ensuring that everyone can make full use of digital technologies and the benefits they bring, and it's also about ensuring that people are best equipped to avoid the potentially negative consequences of an increasingly connected world. And I know people have been talking about that a lot this week. But that is what we see as the most complex and significant challenge raised by our accelerating digital transformation in Australia. We know there are lots of challenges, lots of problems, but we think that that issue of digital exclusion, which I've talked about, is really fundamental. 4 reasons why. First of all, digital exclusion has the potential to reinforce and deepen social and economic inequalities that already exist in Australia. That's the gap between regional and urban Australia as one example, but there are many others. digital exclusion can serve to further stratify and divide our communities rather than facilitate communication and connection. Second reason, digital exclusion is also central because many of those serious risks of harm that we encounter online, that we're concerned about, not all of them, but many of them, arise when bad actors seek to exploit our vulnerabilities and our lack of confidence or knowledge of technical systems. That lack of knowledge, that lack of confidence, as we know, translates into fear and stress, even in cases where no further harm is done. Third, because digital capabilities have recently become so important for our ability to access a whole lot of other essential services, education, training, health, financial services, emergency responses, the labour market, our interactions with all of those domains have now also become digital to a significant degree. Fairer education systems and more equitable health care will necessarily depend on improving digital as well as physical services, nowhere more so than in places like Shepparton. And these are going to be particularly important in rural Australia. Fourth reason, because the tech and the services that use it are not standing still. So we don't have the luxury of a static position where we can see what we need to do, we can take time, we can muster the resources, and we can do something about it and focus on what's required. We're dealing with a moving target when we're dealing with digital inclusion. As I say, the tech is not standing still. AI is not the future, but the present. It's already deeply embedded in the digital tools and services that we're using every day. And I know one of the sessions just this afternoon was looking at AI in everyday applications. So as users, as consumers and citizens, we all need to know far more about it than we do. Here again, the stakes are constantly being raised. Generative AI is developing quickly, from tools which create things to answer questions on ChatGPT or create an image or a chart if we want it. It's moving on from that, just as we're trying to catch up with it. It's moving on from creating things to doing things for us, acting as an agent or an assistant. But we can't demand the safe, responsible and trustworthy AI that we need without being confident in our own capabilities to make the best use of it. So I'm not trying to suggest that solving digital inclusion means solving everything. But it does mean that if we can respond to that challenge, we are in a position to create new opportunities for ourselves and at the very least prevent people from falling further behind. Now, as Mary said, we've been studying digital inclusion for some time now. We recognise that, especially in the regions, access to quality, reliable and affordable internet is crucial, and so are skills, the ability to use tech to do what you need to do and what you want to do. But we think that focusing just on technology and even just on skills as well can also lead us to overlook some significant aspects of this that I want to highlight tonight. It's, from our perspective, from what we've learned about this, it's much more about people and about getting people together, which is what this program is doing. So it's about community. When people are digitally included, we believe that we can see that households benefit, organisations benefit, and communities benefit. When communities are digitally included, the results are significant. Local businesses and leaders gain confidence. They can use technology to pursue their goals. Now, as part of our collaboration with the Victorian Women's Trust on the Rural Women's Online program, members of our research team have joined with the initial community consultations that were held with local leaders, business people and community representatives about this program. What they shared helped form the basis of what's been going on this week. We heard a lot about the challenges and the barriers to digital inclusion, but it wasn't all negative, far from it. So among the things we heard was that there was a wait list for a women's mentorship program to start and grow their businesses. Demand was high and participation growing through word of mouth. Women were connecting across cultures and ages, sharing skills and building networks. We heard that during the floods here, social networks on Facebook and WhatsApp were essential for keeping everybody informed with photos and updates. Public Wi-Fi was also a critical lifeline during that time of crisis. We heard from a local service provider who recognised that online job applications can be a barrier to those who are experiencing digital exclusion, and then there were other ways of reaching out and contacting people who might be interested in a position. We heard that public libraries continue to be havens for those seeking help with online services as more and more essential services move online. We were talking about this evening, about how public libraries can work as a neutral space for people. So those positive elements involve technology, but they were made possible by the rich connections that exist within this community. And it's those two elements, the technology and the community, which we see as crucial to digital inclusion. Back in the 1990s and 2000s, the key in all the debates around this issue was access. Were you connected to the internet? Could you get a connection to the internet? If you couldn't get a connection, you were on the wrong side of what we were then beginning to call the digital divide. But we know that connection is not enough. Even in rural and regional Australia, where it is such a huge issue, there are other things that are necessary. Skills are critical, and the cost of being online is also a significant barrier. Not just the cost of data, but also the cost of the devices that are required to use it. And I mentioned earlier the proliferation of digital tools that we are now finding are out there in order to do the range of different tasks that we are expected to be doing. So while most people in Australia now have home internet, as opposed to the situation that existed 20 years ago, the quality of that connection still varies very widely, and so does what people can do online. Device availability and usage differ, and there are growing gaps, in fact, between non-users and low users and frequent users, and those users we sometimes call proxy users who use the internet and online services through another person, say a member of their household who does things for them. Teaching, tracking digital inclusion is crucial. Participation in today's digital world requires resources, skills and knowledge, and it also demands time and opportunity. I'll say just a little bit about that. But the knowledge base about where we are with all of this is important. Mary mentioned the Digital Inclusion Index, the tool that we have developed to help measure digital inclusion across Australia and over time. That helps us understand the scale of the problem. It measures access, it measures affordability, it measures digital skills across the country, and it provides a range of multiple ways to get at this question of what is driving digital inclusion in different places. So let's look at the situation in regional Victoria, specifically Greater Shepparton. What we find here is that the digital inclusion score, as in the rest of the country, has been rising over the past few years. But despite that improvement, it's still lower than the overall score for Australia. People in Shepparton are using technology more frequently and on a greater range of devices than ever before, just like the rest of the country. But the scores remain lower than the Victorian average. None of that, however, is inevitable. If we look at our findings specifically for regional Victoria, we find, and this is really interesting, we find that women in particular have higher scores than men. In regional Victoria, women are increasingly accessing technology more frequently on a greater range of devices for a wider range of purposes than men. So programs like Rural Women Online are not starting from scratch. They're building on that level of interest and capability in taking advantage of the opportunities of technology. So what's behind those numbers? I did want to say a little bit about some work that a colleague of ours who was here earlier this week, Jenny Kennedy, has done on low-income families in Shepparton and their experiences online. Now, Jenny looked at the impact of what was called the Connected Students program, a program that tackled affordability barriers to digital inclusion here. With Telstra's support, Connected Students provided kits to low-income households with students who are between the ages of 15 and 18. So at that point in high school where you really need to be able to use tech in order to get through. Kits included a laptop, a router, and unlimited broadband for 2 years. And so Jenny's research sought to understand what impact that had, what difference did that make on people's lives, not just for the students themselves, but also, of course, for the households they were in. She found that the money that would have been spent, that would have gone to laptops or connections, was redirected in those households to other necessities. Parents didn't have to choose between buying a device or extending connectivity. It reduced family conflict over devices and eased pressure on schedules. Families didn't need to travel for free Wi-Fi or for access to devices. So one participant said, I'm quoting, she said, "It's made it a lot easier. The tension over phones, the arguments over data usage, the same in every house. It's just stopped one level of stress, which has been really good." And in that quotation, I think you see a key message that digital inclusion takes place, is fostered, is developed within households, within families, within domestic settings. We can also see, given Telstra's involvement in that program, that business has a role too. It's not just about households. But this is what happens in the home. Digital inclusion initiatives benefit the individual, they also benefit the broader household, and that then impacts how household members are participating in or influencing the broader community. So, trying to pull some of these thoughts and observations together. The digital ecosystem we're living in is vast and varied. Communities have different needs. Digital inclusion looks different in every context. What we demand of tech and what tech demands of us also changes over time. So what it means to be digitally included in Shepparton now might not be the same as in Wodonga, in Ballarat or Chuka. Each community has unique challenges and opportunities. Understanding these local contexts is essential to addressing digital inequalities effectively. Now, when we think of digital inclusion, it's always tempting to go back to the idea that tech is the key issue. But the focus on technology always risks us overlooking the importance of community. Technology alone does not create an inclusive society. So what can we learn from the Rural Women Online program, from the inspiring work of the Victorian Women's Trust in making this happen. Some of the lessons that struck me, thinking about what we've been doing here this week and all the work that went into making it happen, some of those lessons might seem a little bit paradoxical, a little bit counterintuitive, but I'm going to try them out on you, and we think that they can help us in responding to this challenge and all the other challenges and opportunities that arise out of it. So first of all, the significance of the problem. We need to recognise that as the digital divide, as we've become used to calling it, as the digital divide is narrowing, as devices and tech get better and cheaper and more of us are connected, as I said at the beginning, more of us connected, doing more things and more stuff, the paradox of that is that the gap that remains matters more, not less. And that's because the costs of exclusion grow as the number of excluded people diminish. If you think back, that 20, 25-year period I mentioned, back to when we started thinking about the digital divide, at that time, if you didn't have an email address, it was probably an inconvenience. It was probably something that might have made some connections more difficult with some people or organisations, but it was really an inconvenience. Now, if you're not connected now, the costs are much, much higher, because what is going to happen is that you are going to miss out on critical services. So the stakes have been raised. And of course, so when we talk about those, the other thing to remember here is that if we talk about 1 or 2 people out of 10, that sounds like a small number. But at the level of a population, it's not a small number. So those costs are being incurred by, in fact, a large number of people. At the level of the population, a comparatively small number of people is a large group. Those 2 excluded people out of the group of 10 represent over 4 million people in the adult Australian population. So that's the number of people who are materially excluded. Second point about the role of community agency. We need to understand that despite the critical challenges around infrastructure and access in northeastern Victoria and elsewhere, especially right across, in rural Australia generally, digital inclusion is not, as I said, it's not just about technology or engineering, and it's not about skills. Both are critically important. So the major investments that have been made in communications over recent decades are a good example, from the NBN to mobile networks and more recently Starlink and other low Earth orbiting satellites. All of those things have delivered significant improvements for people in regional Australia. There is no question about that. But they are not enough to solve the problem on its own. These are necessary for digital inclusion, but they are not sufficient. What's missing, what is critical, is community, communication, and human agency. Now, the third key lesson, I think, from Rural Women Online is the focus on place, the focus on doing this work here. And the way I think about that is to say that we need to remember that the internet is always local. We usually talk about the online world as if it's global or placeless, that it's some sort of cyberspace which doesn't exist anywhere, but it is actually always grounded in where we are, in the technical and social and cultural infrastructures that are available to us, in the places we live, in the places we work, in the places we meet, such as this or libraries or others, and the places we talk to each other. So the internet is always local. And the last kind of key point which struck me as important relates to work, and which is really what has been going on here all week, serious work. So this is about the understanding that digital technology creates work and consumes time. that might sound silly and obvious to you, but in the field of technology studies, we sometimes talk about the ironies of automation. And the key here is the observation that when new labour-saving systems, such as digital service apps, those kinds of things, are introduced, this is often in the name of saving labour, of being more efficient, those kinds of things. But they often have the effect of creating additional work in some other place, shifting costs rather than getting rid of them completely. So this is often the case with tech. Rather, the onus is placed on the user to learn how to make it work. We often manage this in families with one person, sometimes taking on the role of being the tech-savvy person. Of course, that can create its own difficulties, can create, in fact, new sources of stress sometimes, especially for those who are vulnerable or in difficulty. For example, when you lose, for whatever reason, that tech-savvy person in the household, a child who moves away or a partner who dies, any of those things can happen, and that can produce an overwhelming degree of anxiety and difficulty and a real challenge in relation to just the work involved for the person who is left with that task. So tackling that task in isolation can be debilitating and discouraging. I think the genius of the Rural Women Online program is recognising that we can share the labour of learning and that we often learn best from each other and in company. So I'll finish there. I think these are just a few of the lessons that we can draw from Rural Women Online. And I think these are also just a few of the reasons why the program and the extraordinary work of the Trust will be so important for the women of Shepparton, for rural women and their communities everywhere. Thank you.
Bright spotlights. So hello, and my name's Lindy Neuenhausen, and I am the CEO of the Committee for Greater Shepparton. And it is my great privilege to offer the vote of thanks to Professor Julian Thomas for his he promised me it would be a wide-ranging stroll and then handed me a cheat sheet, and then he's meandered even further. So the cheat sheet was a much narrower explanation of what the territory that you've managed to cover today. So very quickly, before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet tonight and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I think that is a key component of what we're exploring here in Shepparton, is the role of technology that has this capacity to connect across time and across communities and across languages and even across a river that divides our city. And when you look at the points you were making tonight about the incredible impact that digital exclusion can have on people, we don't need to cast our minds far to understand what that means. We can go back barely 18 months to the floods, and never was there such an impact that was so immediate and struck all levels of the community and demonstrated to us that when emergency services are entirely dependent on digital delivery, or our energy connections are limited to one side of the river and you can't charge your phone, or that our entire workforce is spread across a region, and once it's unable to travel, the inability to receive and confirm information about, well, where is it safe to travel in order to get to work? How big is the detour that I will need to take? Do I genuinely trust Google Maps at this point in time? We begin to understand that digital exclusion is not just identified by a socio-economic standard or the other factors we touched on. It's often brought out at a point in time through incidents and events that impact on all of us. And I think it's a very valuable point in time to reflect on, because that's what helps us understand and relate to the challenges that others will go through every day of the week who are unable to participate in the systems and processes that we expect will happen. The other I really kept coming back to was the concern I have about the exclusion is actually robbing us of the richness of community engagement and conversation. And when you live in a city like Shepparton, we have 40 plus faiths represented in the city. We have 106 of the 160 nations around Australia living in our city. And we have this rich history of migration and wave after wave of arrivals that means we're the home of Victoria's first mosque and Australia's youngest ever Socceroo. And we can only lay claim to that because of our diverse community that is able to work together. And so this idea that somehow digital communication and connection can bring us closer together is wonderful, but when it excludes, we become an echo chamber of those we speak with. And there was a brilliant line from someone who said, you will never know less by talking to your enemies. You'll never necessarily know more by talking to the same. And I think that is the real challenge we have in how we make use of technology, is to not use it to exclude others, but to also to not purposely exclude ourselves from being challenged or being considered in how we explore the information that's out there ahead of us. I think we only have to look to the events in the US to understand how destructive a binary conversation can be to the exploration of possibilities and new ways of thinking. So the other point I really kept coming back to me as well was actually from another presenter, but you nailed it in your explanations. And he was saying the other day that the pace of change has never been so fast and it will never be so slow again. So we're not talking about, I think this week has provided a platform for us to explore so much of what is available and possible now, and also the challenges and threats that might be in front of us. But we're not embarking on a single point in time education process and then you're set for life. What we're embarking on is a journey of learning to be confident in the use of technology. And you did raise the 3 points of, I'm just going to check my notes here that I got it right. You spoke about access, skills and cost, and I would add to that confidence. I can't recall the number of times I've said to staff working on my websites or socials or whatever, trust me, it's only the Kardashians that can break the internet. We're okay. And learning to make mistakes and have those conversations I think is really important. But equally having the respect for the agencies that are trying to use these vehicles to reach out to more of us and engage us in more ways than has been possible. One small typo on a post doesn't change its sentiment, and yet it can create such a wave of comments about lack of diligence or failure to do something. And again, we're missing what the vehicle is meant to be there for, is about engaging us, and it actually feeds that fear of participation, and yet again robs us of the richness of conversations that are possible. And then finally, in terms of running to stand still, I am exhausted. I think the technology that's out in front of us is, well, personally, I think it's just so exciting. I think the analogy I have is, when my granddad fled Norway, he came to Australia. He never had contact with his family by voice for 30 years until he returned. We can change all of that. We are connected immediately. We have the capacity and the skills to actually do that safely and continuously, and that brings us closer to wherever we've come from and from whatever we want to do. And that is the real, the nuggets of joy that you bring out of these opportunities. I think the learning about how to do it safely and going back to that confidence point and the skills and the access and how we build it in, that is a part of the conversations we're having today about how we build housing. We have talked about, it's good to see NBN here today, we have talked about, why isn't technology and that NBN digital connectivity as much a feature of how we build housing as putting in the electricity and the lifts. It's just there, and it's not something that people have to choose whether they buy into their property. So having touched on the echo chamber and the fears that it can bring, I think at no point in my experience in the workforce and going beyond that have I felt such a sense of opportunity to participate in conversations that are happening anywhere and everywhere and all at once. From the local catch-ups and the immediate community connectivity that we saw mobilised in response to our floods, to the, however many submissions I've been writing of late with regard to energy transition and freight planning and what do we want Victoria to grow to become. And I think these are all great examples of where if we can get it right and if we can get the skills right, and why this week has been so important about lifting public discourse and public engagement to something that's meaningful and ongoing and not just a point in time. So thank you for getting us thinking. Thank you also to Mary and the team who have made this week happen, from the delightful mocktails to the really fascinating events and opportunities you've created across the week. It has been a huge undertaking, no doubt about that, and also a really fascinating insight into the different components and different aspects of digital literacy, digital inclusion, but more importantly, collaboration and partnerships that we can build locally. So once again, thank you for your time. Thank you to everyone who made this week happen, and thank you for the delightful strawberry mocktail. Thanks.
Feels precarious walking up there. Hello there. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Alana Johnson, the Chair of the Victorian Women's Trust. And I've been over here this week. I've come over from where I live, south of Benalla, in Tangarong country. And I think a fitting start for me is firstly, in her absence, to acknowledge and pay respect to our wonderful long-time board director, well-known local in Shepparton, and proud Yorta Yorta woman, Leanne Miller. So we've learnt a lot from Leanne and have had this wonderful partnership that's been happening for over 30 years. So that's fantastic. So I think I should start. I've been here for a few days this week, and it's just been a joyful experience So with appreciation to the men who are in the room, I'm just going to push you to the side for a minute, park you, because there is something that really special happens when you get a whole lot of women together who are there to collaborate and help one another. There's a special sort of energy, and I think probably all of us are aware that we'll go away feeling a greater sense of energy and enthusiasm and optimism, because that's what happens, it generates that. So I've had this lovely week working with all these wonderful women who have come through the door and participated in the program. So it's my job to thank a large number of people. Firstly, Julian, thank you for that very thought-provoking presentation. I met Julian back 3 years ago now, and his wisdom about this whole issue has really been a huge support and has informed the development of the Rural Women Online program. So thank you, Julian. And to Linda, thank you for your words. And coming to Shepparton from Benalla, so Shepparton being a much bigger city, I am always struck when I come here about the vibrancy of this city. There is the diversity of it, the caring community that you have created, which really showed in in the last terrible floods, double floods that you had. Shepparton is a very special place in Victoria. It's sort of a bit a hidden gem, and it's always a joy to come over here. I think it's a fantastic example of what a vibrant rural community can be. So the RMIT team have been with us this week. I think Kieran's still with us. And is Stephanie here too? Yes, there she is. So we're missing Jenny, who's been with us, and Robin. But it's just been wonderful to have you here. And like the work with you, the support that you're going to give us with the evaluation, the beautiful video photography that's happened with Natalie this afternoon. I mean, it's just been such a lovely partnership, and we really value this time that we've, through these 3 years, worked with you, and we're looking forward to having you work with us in Yakandanda. NBN, Charlene, Donovan, and we must say great appreciation to you for not only supporting this program, but we'll see you in Yakandanda because you're supporting that as well. And we've also had a range of wonderful stand holders who've been out in the foyer every day, presenting information, chatting to people, telling people about what they can offer. One of the most magic parts of this has been the collection of these amazing young women who have been the drop-in staff. We've had Meg and Zara and Cynthia and Fatima and Mandy, and they've just been out there so welcoming, so patient, so delighted to work with all of the women who have turned up, to the point that Fatima on Monday had left her 1-year-old baby for the first time with her sister, and she turned up on Tuesday, and she turned up on Wednesday, and she's turned up today because she has just had the most marvellous time. And she wants to thank everybody for including her in this. And then wandering around, and I'm sure he's here somewhere, is Rob over the back there. Talk about doing, technical magic. All of this wouldn't have happened without Rob, so thank you to you. I also want to thank Chris Nunn from Wisewell Women, who it was wonderful to create an opportunity for women whose first language isn't English to have facilitated translation and to really help that part of narrowing that digital divide. My favourite part of the whole event has to be the little lounge room that we created. I've gone and sat there a number of times. Isn't that beautiful? I mean, that's such a women's way of setting up a conference or a venue. So to go with that has to be a thank you to Bill and Betts from Maroopna for the beautiful soup and lunch we had every day. So I enjoyed sitting there. And of course, then I need to turn to the Rural Women Online team, and what a team they are. So, Jess, where are you? Like, this young woman here has carried this whole thing pretty much on her shoulders. She has just been wonderful, and most of you would have seen her just flitting around the whole time, keeping track of everything. I don't know how or where the skills and the know-how comes from to do it at your age, but you blow me away. Then we've had Bim Rutherford from Shepparton and Leanne Mulcahy from Yackandandah. Oh, she actually isn't from Yackandandah. Are you from Beechworth, Leanne? That's right. But you're going to be working at the Yackandandah. And so they've been doing all the community connecting, and a lot of people, you would have known them because they've just been everywhere. And Bim, the amount of work that you've done in creating the knowledge across the whole community about this event has been amazing. We have to welcome Ali Oliver Perham, who comes from Castlemaine but works with the Victorian Women's Trust and who's made special trip to be here with us. And we've also got, and I think he's left now, but we've had George Egan, who's the tech man from Bendigo, who also works with the Victorian Women's Trust, so he's come all this way to lend his expertise. And then we have a couple of people who are missing, who haven't been able to be with us today, and that's Rachel and Bron, so our thoughts go to them too. We have to give special acknowledgement to the fact that this program would never have been able to happen in the way it has if it wasn't for our project funders, which are the Helen McPherson Smith Trust and the Bendigo Bank Community Foundation. They have been significant contributors to this, and the reason we've been able to do a part 2, phase 2 of the Rural Women Online project in coming to Shepparton for a whole week is due to their support. And of course, the City of Shepparton, this venue has just been so beautiful, hasn't it? And the events team who work for the City of Shepparton have just been marvellous, as have Telstra, in setting all of this up. So what a week we've had, and we've got a little glimpse again tomorrow, so some more to attend. And then anyone who's interested, do come to Yackandandah. We have someone from Yackandandah who's come here. So we're open doors in Yackandandah for anyone in Shepparton who feels like, oh, I want more of that, or I want to take my friends to that. Come over to Yackandandah. So that's on the 10th to the 14th of September. Finally, I want to thank Nikki Freedman, the Deputy Chair of the Victorian Women's Trust, who's been with us also for a long time and come up to join us. So thank you, Nikki. Your presence is appreciated. And then how do you thank Mary Crooks? She is the brains, she is the energy, she is the money finder, she is the stickability, she is the thing that the whole thing runs on. So Mary, you know you have incredible admiration not only from your board and your staff, but I think many, many women around the whole of Victoria. So I want to just take this time to especially thank you. And in terms of what you've left us with, Julian, I think a really important point that I will take with me, that notion that understanding your local context has to be a pivotal thing, a foundational thing that we need to do. We've got to understand every community, our own communities, and how they work in order to make progress on the digital divide. And so I think it's incumbent on all of us now to be part of addressing that in our own communities and being involved. When women help women, a lot of great things can happen, as we know. So I suppose it's a call out now for all of the women of Shepparton who have participated in this program to be able to now stretch out your hand and offer assistance and support and information to other women, knowing that your wonderful library is open here for people to actually go and learn some of the things that we've all learnt this week. So being active community members is one of the magic ingredients in reducing this digital divide. And I'm ready to go home and practice AI for the first time. Thank you.